C'est à la faveur d'une rencontre avec le
few figures command attention like Charles Ble Goude, the former ally of the ex-president Laurent Gbagbo. Ble Goude's name evokes strong emotions, both admiration and criticisms. He had returned to the West African country in 2022 after 11 years of exile in relation with these alleged involvement in the political upheavals of 2010 to 2011. Speaking earlier this week, Ble Goude, leader of the Pan-African Congress for Justice and People's Equality, Congrès Pan-Africain pour la Justice et Égalité des Peuples, COJEP, stated that it was not right that until now he has not benefited from any amnesty from the incumbent president of Côte d'Ivoire, Alassane Ouattara. Now, as the country approaches the pivotal 2025 elections, his bid for amnesty to re-enter the political arena raises pressing questions. What does his potential candidacy signify for Ivory Coast's fragile reconciliation process? How might his influence and how might these influence the political equilibrium in the West African country? And most importantly, what does this reveal about evolving a narrative of justice and democracy in the region? In this analysis, we will delve into the implications of Ble Goude's ambitions, the historical context of his role in Ivorian politics, and the challenges that lie ahead for both him and the West African nation. Ladies and gentlemen, don't go away. This is Talking Point over your Pan-African channel. Stay with us. Ivorian politician Charles Ble Goude has called for the government, or better still the president of the West African nation, Alassane Ouattara, to grant him amnesty so he can run for the 2025 presidential elections in the West African nation. Well, noting that this comes in the wake of numerous announcements by various political figures in the West African country to announce their candidacies for the upcoming elections built for 2025. And to evoke this topic of discussion, like we mentioned in our preamble, we've been joined by Dr. Ivory, who is a global politics consultant, executive secretary of Committee of Actions for Côte d'Ivoire. Good things, sir. Thank you for joining us this day.
Thanks, Sharon. It's always a pleasure to be invited to this media, and thank you for having us. And greetings to all the listeners, and as well as my co-panelist of the day, Brother Stanley.
Thank you immensely for honoring our invitation. Meanwhile, like you mentioned already, Dr. Ivory equally been joined by Dr. Stanley FONGOD, Pan-Africanist, economist, and a FINTECH expert. Thank you immensely, sir, Dr. FONGOD, for joining us this day.
Thank you so much, Sharon, for having me. Thank my co-panelists for joining us, Dr. Eddie, and our thanks our listeners as well for tuning in.
Thank you immensely for joining us, and without wasting too much of time, we would dive right into analysis this day on the topic of discussion, which takes us all the way to Côte d'Ivoire with the political atmosphere in the West African country. Like I kick-started with you, Dr. Ivory. Now, given you are a global politics expert and you're equally related with Côte d'Ivoire, let's debut this conversation with the historical context of the West African country. We saw these latest developments coming at a time when it's just 2 years since Charles Ble Goude returned to the country after 11 years of being away. Now, in the wake of his demand, or better still, a call for amnesty for him to be able to run for the upcoming elections bid for 2025, what's your analysis as far as this is concerned, and how can this shape perception of his current bid for the presidency?
The situation is as number one on the ground in Côte d'Ivoire. There is this urge, this desire for the Ivorian people to turn definitely the page of a horrible conflict that the country descended into starting 2002, which of course, has some pre-existing, background to it, but spiraling into a country being split into two, as we all know of. heading into a very difficult presidential election in 2010, which was supposed to seal the deal and then bring the country together. Unfortunately, what led us into another path. The end of this conflict, to summarize very quickly, we had a post-election violence that led to, officially, people are talking about 3,000 deaths. We think it is way more than that. And of course, the International Criminal Court, were getting involved, with a former President Laurent Gbagbo being transferred to The Hague, and a few months, and I would say a year after that, with Charles Ble Goude, after being captured in Ghana, kept in detention in Cote d'Ivoire, also transferred to The Hague. With his return back to Cote d'Ivoire, the political landscape in Cote d'Ivoire, in Ivory Coast today, is really and slowly reshaping. When you look at the major political parties such as the PDCI, even the PPA, CI, funded now by President Laurent Gbagbo after departing from his former political party, the FPI, when you look at the political regime or the party in power, the RHDP, as we say, there is some sort of reshaping of the political landscape, of the offer, but also of the personnel. The human resource in there. There is more and more an urge for a younger generation to knock at the door to hold the helm of this country. And I believe that, it is within this context that we should analyze this desire to compete for the 2025 elections, which again, many Ivorians, the greater majority of Ivorians, believe will be another opportunity for the country to come together and then to march in the right direction. The right direction here will be, number one, to seal peace and reconciliation, durable peace and reconciliation, and of course, entrench a truly democratic order. What we see with our friend and brother Charles Ble Goude is not an isolated case. There are many other leaders of that age range that are also showing greater sign and interest in competing for or vying for this most important political position, which is the presidency. We have, for instance, Asale Timoko, who is a deputy but also a mayor of a rural area called Tiasale. Not long ago, launched is a political movement called in French, Aujourd'hui, Demain, la Côte d'Ivoire, and who is also more and more growing. We have some other leaders, even within the PDCI, RDA, the first political party which held the power up to 1999, when it was evicted from power following a coup d'etat. This party also has a new president, in the name of Tidiane Thiam, and they are also preparing for this election to take over. On the other side, you would still have people that have been known. Former First Lady Simone Gbagbo was nominated by her now party, the Mouvement de Génération Capable, to vie for this position in 2025. And even within the PDCI LDA, as I mentioned earlier, you do have some other individuals who are not the president of those parties. For instance, Jean-Louis Billon, who lately have clearly manifested his interest. And all of these individuals, the younger generation, are clearly indicating that, it is right time to compete, and making sure that the political arena does not remain confiscated by the leaders that, we have known. For instance, President Laurent Gbagbo, Mr. Alassane Ouattara, who is currently the head of state, and unfortunately, former President Henri Konan Bédié, who died over a year ago. So this is the political landscape. Hopefully, in the midst of all that, the conversation is also going around the Independent Electoral Commission, which many people are actually calling for it to be dismantled, simply because of the partiality that the president of this commission has shown, and for many other reasons as well. This is what the context is currently this is what the political debate is in the midst of an enormous, economic debt that the country is incurring, but also with the purchasing power for families dwindling, whereas inflation is also impacting a lot more families, and many other things that Sharon we can definitely talk about. So this is my reading of the political, economic, and also social landscape in Cote d'Ivoire at the moment.
Thank you so much for elaborating on that, Dr. Eddie. And of course, that leads me to the next question, which you, Dr. FONGOD, you listened to your co-panelists citing, giving us a vivid picture of how Charles Ble Goude political history in the West African country evolved over years. Now, when you look at these Ivorian politician from over the years and his political career, what would you say has been his journey? How has it evolved since his acquittal from the International Criminal Court, ICC, right up to this date, and what does that reveal about his political ambitions for the West African country?
Well, I think Charles Ble Goude, stands a shoulder above many in that political rank, and the only reason why I say that is because if you look at his background right from university in the home country, I think he had a lot to do with a youth uprising and trying to be involved in politics earlier on. Basically, like most of these guys on the African continent, that comes along the Cameroon because of some kind of a youth activism. And so as a result of that, he came through that ranks. I think he basically did an uncompleted degree in justice or something in that regard in London, and he didn't complete, I think it was complete resolution, which he tried to do in London, but never completed, and then returned back and basically got through the ranks and became a minister under Laurent Gbagbo. The idea for me, especially looking at his life, has been this whole entire thing about amnesty now. I understand, frankly speaking, that I'm not a fan of The Hague. I have never been one, and I think that The Hague has been there just for Africans and everyone in between except the Western Bloc. And so when we start talking about justice and war crimes, I think that the only people committing war crimes in this world are those of African origins or those from some third world nations. You never find those in developed nations who have done great atrocity to humanity being pulled into The Hague. Maybe that's the reason why countries like the United States of America does not even subscribe to it. But they will basically beat the drum of excitement when those that define, who is in antithesis to what is it that they believe in, like Russia and God knows who, it's been indicted or it's been, a warrant of arrest is being sent out by The Hague, they do celebrate. Looking at the current situation, I think that there has to be some kind of an amnesty that is given to Ble Goude. And the reason for that is because if you're going to be talking about unity, and unity, we need to be able to look forward, and rather than trying to be able to hold on to the issues of the past. And for that to happen, there has to be some kind of a Truth and Reconciliation Committee. People need to know exactly what happened, how it happened, and who was responsible. And even if you are going to step out and say you want to turn the page, we cannot turn the page without fully understanding in depth as to what happened, so what happened will not happen again. And I think that this is where, the tension might be. Do we have enough time to do that before, the next presidential election, where that basically brings the country, throw the country back into some kind of chaos? I do not know. But the reality is this. At some point in time, we also have to sacrifice whatever our own political ambition is for the greater good of the people. If you have become such a polarizing figure and you're trying, or you're trying to run for office, and if your presence in participating, there are so many ways I think that he can be useful so far as the political process is concerned. Maybe participate in something that has to do with the Truth and Reconciliation Committee without necessarily running, running for office now. I think he's 52 years old. He has enough time, at least maybe sit out one term, just so that the country can fully heal. And then once we fully understand what what happened. If you're going to commit this 20-year sentence that looms over his head, that will be something that is reasonable. But I think it might just be too early, for him to get into power. It might be too early for him to be pushing for, to run for office, especially with every single thing that happened in 2010, 2011, still hanging on his head. I think we have to be able to have those conversations and see how we can be able to look for the greater good of the Ivorian rather than someone's own political ambitions.
Exactly. And of course, it's all about putting the interests of the people ahead and, of course, defending their integrity. And now, with you, Dr. Eddie, your co-panelist cited that it's important or imperative for every political figure to always defend the interests of the people. Like taking the case of what's happening in Ivory Coast, you earlier on cited that we have numerous individuals or political figures in the West African country that have declared their interest to run for the nation's top job to come 2025, amongst which is cited, Simone Gbagbo, the former First Lady of the West African nation, admits others. Now, with this pace, already said, Charles Ble Goude had earlier on mentioned that he had intentions of running for the nation's top job, that is the presidency, in 2025. But at this particular point in time, what might be the legal hurdles, or better still constitutional challenges, that he might have to overcome in a bid to secure this amnesty before he can be able to run for the 2025 elections?
Listen, you heard it, and you did announce it, earlier. There is this 20-year sentence that looms over his head, and not just him, but also
exactly.
President Laurent Gbagbo. But here's where things become complicated and tricky. Charles Ble Goude is asking Mr. Alassane Dramane Ouattara to commute that, with, a presidential grace or an amnesty law. These are two prerogatives of whoever is holding the helm of the power per the Constitution. If it is the presidential grace that is given, of course, it is a pardon that is granted, within the power of the head of state to wipe out a certain criminal acts, positioning, the beneficiary to run and for some political position. It means, we're granting them back their civil rights. When it is an amnesty law, it becomes even heavier and much more important, because then it is a law that is probably proposed by the head of state, but also voted upon and agreed upon by the National Assembly, which is the true house of the people. Usually, people will go for an amnesty law, which again, allows the people to clear their slate and start afresh as if nothing has happened before. And the request for that is not extraordinary, because in the history of Cote d'Ivoire, with the crisis that we are talking about, the 2000 constitution, which was voted, overwhelmingly by the Ivorian, electorate body, clearly stipulated in Article 132, and I'm referring to the Constitution of 2000, which is called the Constitution of the Second Republic of Cote d'Ivoire, allowed the members of the Committee of National Salvation, Public National Salvation, to not be charged of any civil and penal crime that may be, charged against them. Why is that? It was a way for the country to heal from the coup d'etat that happened in 1999 and moving forward. Many other laws, like that were taken to grant the people who participated in the rebellion in 2002. Right, for instance, and we are eyeing somebody like Sorogio, who also has a 20 years, jail sentence looming over his head. Having said all that, these hurdles are in there. The challenge is this: are they real? Are they politically motivated? They're tools actually by the current regime in power, using the judiciary system to eliminate certain candidates, for instance, preventing them from vying for the top job in the nation. Many believe so, especially when you look at the ways in which those court proceeding, cases were actually prosecuted. Remember that Mr. Charles Ble Goude and Mr. Laurent Gbagbo, the two of them were still at The Hague. The country knew that, they were not available, and the country actually transferred them to The Hague. It is impossible, while they are at The Hague standing trial, for you to go behind the door, seeing that, what is happening there in The Hague is not ruled going in your favor, and more likely the two individuals are going to be freed from their detention at The Hague. Then you go back and you initiate another civil court against them or criminal court against them, and you find them guilty, paying 20 years on the head. They're not the only one. Yes, it is true that, Mrs. Simone Gbagbo has been cleared, an amnesty law taken on her behalf, but it remains for Charles Ble Goude. Now, technically, if a presidential grace is given and accepted, which is something that, Charles Ble Goude is okay or seems to be okay with, it means that somewhere he does recognize, right, that whatever is being charged with is true or truly happened. That will be a contradiction, I believe, with what happened at The Hague, where they were cleared of all wrongdoings in whatever they were brought there for. If it is an amnesty law, which will be, again, the greatest thing to do, it will put also the current head of state in Cote d'Ivoire at, let's say, in the wrong position, saying that, hey, for almost 15 years, you have charged people, you have prevented them from enjoying the civil and political rights in the nation, even though Charles Ble Goude, Laurent Gbagbo are today, capable of hosting meetings here and there, but still having this sentence looming over their head. That is not good, and these are the technicalities in terms of some of the hurdles that need to be cleared. I believe that, it is a deliberate choice for Mr. Charles Ble Goude to actually request that Mr. Alassane Dramane Ouattara goes with this thing. But there are other hurdles that apply to all of those who are trying to run. Number one is, again, the ways in which the voters' lists are being prepared. And I know that, not long ago, Mr. Charles Ble Goude also met with the head of the Independent Electoral Commission in Cote d'Ivoire to actually talk about it. I did hear him talk about dissolving the current, commission, putting a new one, because there is a lack of trust in the entire process. I think this is also another legal, constitutional, hurdle to be cleared moving forward. Where I want to land on that question, Sharon, is this. Something that my brother Stanley said earlier, in terms of how soon it is for this leader to come to the political arena. I believe that not all the time people run because they know that they're going to win. But we are looking at the future. When you take President Laurent Gbagbo himself, the first time he ran for presidential election in Cote d'Ivoire, it was in 1990. The man was 45 years of age. And at that time, we knew that, he could not stand a chance in front of former presidents, the late Félix Houphouët-Boigny, for instance. But as he said it himself, President Gbagbo at the time, it was a way to start the process, which 10 years later allowed him to come into power. I believe that, what many people in Ivory Coast, including me, believe that it is high time to turn the page. But that page is not going to be turned simply by asking people who we called the older generation to leave. You got to start competing with them. And I believe that, those who are trying to do that in that age frame in their 40s and 50s are doing the right thing for announcing that, by announcing that, they want to compete for that top job. And they have to put their slate together. It is not easy to go in front of the people of Cote d'Ivoire with all of the difficulties that, what the country is experiencing today and say, I want to run the country. What is this that, what you are truly offering that people will buy in and trust you so that, what we live out of where we are? There is the issue of the currency. Do we really want to continue in the next 5, 10, 15, and 20 years to have the French CFA as the currency for Cote d'Ivoire? What is the position on that? Where do we stand when it comes to reconciliation? Where do we stand when it comes to immigration in Cote d'Ivoire? Where do we stand? These are tremendous issues. Where do we stand when it comes to migration? The number of young people in Cote d'Ivoire today who are leaving the country to go abroad, even in the Middle East countries, for instance, to seek a job and employment, with all of the abuses that we're talking about. Where do you stand about the educational system, for instance? Where do you stand about what the relation between Cote d'Ivoire and the neighboring countries? Today they are strained between Cote d'Ivoire, Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, for instance. These are crucial issues that people want to hear the political leaders address, but not any other shenanigan. Once they do that, I believe that whether it is in 2025 or the years after, those younger generation emerging more and more will have a better chance to get the trust of the electorate in Cote d'Ivoire and turn the page and put the country on another path. We're moving forward.
Indeed, and like you mentioned in your response, the issue of a lack of trust in electoral commissions, it's on the rise on the African continent. There is a need for, those in power to have a look at this, this pressing issue. Away from that, you started the issue of currency. Now, we'll be coming back to dive deep into what you said, Dr. Eddie, but first I would like to get the reaction of Dr. FONGOD. And now you listen to your co-panelists who started a lot of pertinent points. If say that Charles Ble Goude is granted amnesty in the West African country, do you believe that this is going to go a long way in influencing more legal precedents in the West African country regarding the accountability from political leaders? Because, with time without number, at some point, political figures are called to be accountable to for whatever actions they get involved in with. So do you believe that granting him amnesty is going to influence some of these legal precedents?
Well, look, here's the problem. It depends really on a couple of things.
Please,
number one, I think that what Dr. Eddie was actually saying had a lot to do with the fact that we could be able to have this amnesty, maybe if I got it incorrectly, but my understanding was you could have this amnesty and then, or, some kind of clemency, or however you want to put it, and then have this, someone like him basically vying for office, and then mindfully, well, that he's just going to be an introductory phase into the whole thing. I fully understand that, because obviously I don't think anyone actually expects him to win. But what I'm trying to say is this, that it's the double-edged sword pertaining to the question that you just asked. If we basically offer and say, okay, you know what, let's turn the page, you're cleared of all wrongdoings. And if there were legitimate wrongdoings, that inspires a generation of people who will believe that there always will be a way in which we want to turn the page, because we don't want to incite violence. We want to turn the page, and then that cycle of violence, within the political space will continue. And then on the other hand, if we do not basically grant these people what they're looking for, then it will be that we're inhibiting the process, or basically disturbing and inhibiting the process of them, participating in the political space, and also, as citizens of the nation of Ivory Coast with a 20-year sentence, hanging over their head. That really becomes a problem. My issue is, irrespective of what kind of judicial precedents that this might be able to set, that in itself still does not answer the question as to what absolutely happened. I don't know what kind of investigations took place at the level of The Hague. And the reason why I say so is because they were cleared at the level of The Hague. And so if you now have to come back and then look at what the judicial process was back in Ivory Coast, that basically got them this 20-year sentence, then you have to start asking yourself, what does these boys in Ivory Coast know that those guys in The Hague did not know? What was the legal representations that they had either way? So I'm thinking that there has to be some kind of a truth and reconciliation committee. There has to be a dive deep into the into the past as to actually figure out what happened, and then from there we can be able to set a precedent. Reasons being, if we do not know, if everything is left barely to speculations because we are afraid that we are persecuting our political opponents. And frankly speaking, if I was the current president, why will I be giving this young man any kind of clemency for? Right? That's the idea. That's the whole entire African thing. I'm going to stall this thing. I'm going to push it. I'm going to do whatever it takes, because obviously you're eliminating people from the field that will become what I called, the same competitors that you'll be fighting for the top job. So the point is, we have to be able to have a Truth and Reconciliation Committee, people who will look deeply into this matter and says, you know what, these guys were cleared for sure. Whatever was done here in Ivory Coast, in absentia, that basically put them or levied the 20-year sentence on them was either accurate or inaccurate, was either true or false, was politically motivated or not. The reality is, at some point in time, we basically must come to the truth. And if then we are setting up a precedent to say they are absolutely clear of all charges and they return back to civilian lives like nothing happened, then fine. Or we say, you know what, this thing hangs over your head. We're going to basically say you're forgiven for whatever you did, but you can no longer participate in the political process. You can do anything else to serve the nation. You don't have to be the president to be of service to any nation. There are many ways in which you can be of service. And if that was going to hold sway also, then we can now say we are setting up a precedence based upon that. And that in itself would be more legitimate than, not looking back. For some reason, we really need to be able to understand what happened, why, and how.
Thank you so much, Dr. FONGOD. Now, Dr. Eddie, do you share the same opinion as your co-panelist?
I want to say this, that, in terms of precedents, there are and there exists plenty of precedents. I named it, some of them earlier. Remember, in 1999, December 24th, 1999, Cote d'Ivoire experienced its first political coup.
Yes.
After that, the Committee for Public Salvation, under the rule of General, Gay Roberts, led the country into a period of transition that lasted almost, about 10 months. Ending with a presidential election, in October 2000, that President Laurent Gbagbo at the time won. But before that, there was a new constitution that was drafted. As I said, the conversation, the discussion, the debates, the political discourse that led to this new conversation, the new constitution, which was overwhelmingly, I say overwhelmingly, voted in a referendum. I think it is about 86% of the voters that were voting for that new constitution. It was clearly stipulated in there an amnesty law in the constitution enshrined that will clear all the members of the military rulers and all of the other individuals that participated one way or another in all of the events that we call the political coup of that time. We agreed on that. The constitution was voted, which actually cleared the way for the head of the transitional committee, General Gay Robert, to vie for the top job, at the time, and run as a candidate. Of course, he lost. With all that, but we have also experienced it in there. But even right after that, when President Gbagbo came to power, he also signed a lot of either presidential grace or amnesty laws to basically pardon many of those individuals that were also involved in some attempted, coup attempts, either against him or during the time frame that he actually won the election. The military regime wanted to take it over. I'm just very quickly summarizing in here to say that we have a lot of amnesty laws that were signed, taken in Cote d'Ivoire, that even benefited some of the individuals that today are running Cote d'Ivoire, right? When you have the rebellion that started in 2002, all of the peace accord that was signed from Cote d'Ivoire to Lomé, from Lomé to Paris, from Paris to Ghana, from Ghana to South Africa, and even to Ouagadougou to end all of them clearly mentioned that aside from some economic and atrocious or gross human rights violations, any other crimes that should be pardoned. So those things exist. And that's what creates the sort of injustice that some people or individuals like Charles Ble Goude, President Laurent Gbagbo, and his camp, and many other people believe that the current regime in power is not practicing fair justice, and there is a clear and sheer manipulation of the judicial system. This is also something that needs to be done in the majority of African countries where the executive continues to control, manipulate the judicial system. It does not allow us to entrench what we want as a democracy. Because for a democracy to truly function, there needs to be clear checks and balance. These different powers need to run independent of one another. In the case of Cote d'Ivoire, it becomes even more complicated because you have individuals who are members of parliament, and at the same time, they are municipal agents, meaning that, they are mayors of town. The municipal power, for instance, or that division is, what should I call it, a mayor, a deputy, or members of parliament. These are two different powers. So basically, how does one control the other? Or if you want, what to laugh, how do you want Dr. Eddie to control Dr. Eric? These are the same individuals. So this cumulative function sometimes is also another hurdle that you see in there. But not to sidetrack very quickly, I believe that but we have a lot of precedents. If we want to march forward, I do agree. I think that I doubt the sincerity of the proceedings that led in Ivory Coast to the condemnation of both Charles Ble Goude, Laurent Gbagbo, and others to 20 years, and taking away the civilian rights that prevent them, from even being, candidates, being registered, as voters, which is something that, people are pushing back against. It has nothing to do with supporting one candidate or the other. It has something to do with what kind of justice do we want to practice in a country such as Cote d'Ivoire that came out or trying to come out of a very difficult period that lasted, over the last decades. And to add on to that, Sharon, I believe that, yes, we also did have a Truth and Reconciliation Commission that worked very hard under the former Prime Minister Charles Konambani. That commission worked and handed the conclusion of all of the work and the research, the conversation, the focus group discussion they have all over the country with people, with recommendation handed to the government. After that, another commission was also put in place, headed by a Catholic, prelate. But where are we going with all of these things? The question is, what were the recommendations? Were they implemented? Right? These are the things that, I believe will clear. So we have a precedence in all of those things. And in terms of accountability issues, my major thing here is, if you want to hold people accountable for things that happen, it has to be done in the fairest and the most equitable way possible to cast any doubt. But I doubt that, it happened like that.
Thank you. I'll be staying with you, Dr. Eddie. Well, you mentioned, before I asked you the previous question, you were citing like it was in line with a statement made by Charles Ble Goude that it seemed he had been forgiven out of his nation, but was not the case in the West African country of Cote d'Ivoire. Now, in that light, now there have been speculations in recent times of the incumbent, or better still, the incumbent President Alassane Ouattara seeking a third term in Ivory Coast. But then away from that, do you believe that this is some of the reasons why we still don't have Charles Ble Goude having benefited from an amnesty up to now? And what will an amnesty being granted to him mean for, a balance of power within the political arena in the West African nation?
Sharon, I'm not going to look at it that way. If we want to be fair again, And we want to be equitable. We want to be just. And for a leader who believes that, what he's doing the right thing, for Ivory Coast to emerge, more solidly out of the crisis that we have experienced, we meaning people from Cote d'Ivoire, it should not be measured by whether I want to vie for a fourth term in power, and what will be the implication if I do grant amnesty to Charles Ble Goude. Mr. Alassane Ouattara should not be thinking, in those terms, because it is a block, it is an hindrance to democracy, or the type of democracy that he himself said, what he wants to see in the country. It should not be that way, because the voters, the men and women in Cote d'Ivoire, the population in Cote d'Ivoire, this is a matured, very matured, population. People know what they want. And once the candidates are listed in there, of course, with a fair, transparent, open, and free elections, people will do the same thing that happened in Ghana, for instance. We are the same people. It is a quasi-impossible that you see what happened in Ghana, what happened maybe in Senegal with a little bit, of skirmishes here and there. That is not, that cannot be replicated in other countries. I don't believe that. I don't believe that, the people in Cote d'Ivoire are completely of a different breed, violent people, and nothing here will happen serious or good if they go for election. They were going to go fight all the time. I don't believe that. I believe that if we do create fair, clear, clean, free conditions for people to go vote without any fight or whatever it is a possibility, for the people of Cote d'Ivoire to choose among all the candidates who they think is the best to run the country. And that's where we should be going. So it is a wrong and very wrong, I will say, for Mr. Alassane Ouattara to use the judicial system to eliminate some of his opponents or candidates, because he himself benefited from that. He benefited from that. Remember that for him to run for the top job for the first time in 2010, President Gbagbo, out of the crisis, had to sign and take a presidential decree allowing him to run, and that was agreed upon in South Africa under the auspices of former President Thabo Mbeki, for instance. That cleared the hurdle for him. So, same thing today. Aside from Charles Ble Goude, you also have Soro Guillaume, you have Simon Gbagbo, you have many of them in there, right? Let's create and do our best to create the conditions in which, by which, and through which the people of Cote d'Ivoire can very, very, very freely, openly choose who they want to lead them for the next 5, 10, and 15 years to come.
Indeed, Dr.
And by the way, Sharon, it is wrong, already wrong, for Mr. Alassane Ouattara to even seek another term. He already violated the terms of the constitution in Cote d'Ivoire by running for a third term. And if he tried to do that for a fourth term now, even though we call it the first term of the Second Republic or the Third Republic, all this is a political garbage or verbiage that does not stand. He violated the constitution. Him trying to seek will be another violation. It has nothing to do with trying to eliminate some other candidate. He himself is already eliminated by the constitution if we want to abide by it. I just wanted to add that.
Thank you so much, Dr. Eddie. And of course, I'm sure our audience actually noted that as well. Now, moving forward with you, Dr. FONGOD, you listen to your co-panelists. And now, in a bit to, shift the dice and try to focus on something else, could his return, Charles Ble Goude's return to politics within the arena of the West African nation, that is Ivory Coast, exacerbate, existing political tensions, or could these present an opportunity for reconciliation and unity within the West African country?
Well, excuse me, I don't think that him returning to the political arena basically helps the country in any way. And also, I'm not saying that he should not. I'm looking at all the, we're just listening to Dr. Eddie talk about all the the Truth and Reconciliation committees that have met, or recommendations that nobody knows nothing about, or what it was in those reports. I'm not sure anyone knows. And so we are basically through in this state where everything has become so political. And then in the end, people's rights also been violated one way or the other. My point is, there has to be ways in which we try as much as we can to be able to help, Ivory Coast. I think that Ivory Coast has enough problems as it is. One of the biggest sector in Ivory Coast, it's the agricultural sector, will be the farming of cocoa. Ivory Coast, as of today, has declined 22.7%. 22.7%. That is insane. If you look at the projections, for the growth of the economy, it has been, I think 2021 was about 6.6%. 2024 rather grew to about 6.5. Actually diminished about 6.5, and by 2025 the projections by IMF will basically indicate that it's actually going to go down maybe to 6.4. That is, it's actually more of a contraction than anything else. And so the reason for this is, just look at the agricultural sector, which Ivory Coast is known for. These are the largest cocoa producers in the world. And if we are going to be, if there's gross reduction as to 22 point something percent, on the overall outlook, that in itself is not good. I understand that there's so many factors, climate change, young people basically migrating and moving out of the country. I get that. But the reality is, we have to be able to focus more on what is it that is in the interest of the people and the interest of the nation. I fully get that everyone has the right to be able to express their own political views and basically come into power and do what they have to do. The Constitution basically mandates and gives them the opportunity and the authority to be able to do so. My point is, at what point do we basically say we are going to be able to work for the interest of the nation? At what particular point do we start looking at things that do matter? If you show up in the country, any country on the African continent for that matter, and you're able to just basically put a robot, all right, maybe a guinea pig, maybe a cow, whatever, something, just something there to be in power. And if you are able to grow the economy, get young people working, and absolutely bring about infrastructural development into the nation in areas of healthcare, in areas of education, bring about a more a responsible mining sector, a more engaging agricultural sector where people are working and doing what they have to do, I think that nobody will care who is actually at the top. No one cares. And the reason for that is because the people will be getting exactly what the people need. And it's not so much about, who is in power, an identity thing, when people are suffering. We saw this actually here in the States, with the incoming president, Donald Trump. Nobody cared about what anybody said concerning him, with all the accusations and lawsuits and convictions. No one cared. And the reason for that is because the people were suffering. When there's gross inflation, prices are high, nobody cares about all your political, garbage. People are interested in making sure that they have food on the table. And I think that, that might just be the situation that we're having in Ivory Coast. I am not there to understand the sentiments or the temperature of the people in regards to this, but I can honestly tell you across the board, vis-a-vis what happened in Ghana recently, that the talk mostly was about the economy and how do we get the economy working for the local Ghanaian. And in Ivory Coast will be, how do we get this economy working, for the Ivorian? If that is not the question, and if that's not the mandate, if that's not the idea, then I think that all we'll be having will be political theater that is antithesis to the joy and to the needs of the people. We have to find ways in which we get the people involved, and the only way for them to be able to involve is for them to vote to who they think will have their best interest at heart, who is going to get the economy working again, who is going to bring about, more jobs, especially in the agricultural sector, those who will bring about more technology in agriculture, especially when it comes to cocoa farming, because obviously that's a huge portion of the GDP for Ivory Coast. And also start thinking about ways in which we can be able to compete especially when you start looking at a country like Ivory Coast and a small known, I'm sure Dr. Eddie knows this particular location in Pennsylvania, a small known community in Pennsylvania called Hershey, Pennsylvania. Hershey. All right, Hershey, Pennsylvania, very small community. I used to live outside of Hershey in a place called Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. I used to go to Hershey and I would get on the rides in Hershey, Pennsylvania. It is known for chocolate. All right, there's not one cocoa plant anywhere in Hershey. The weather does not permit it. But they are a big-time producer, and if you look at the GDP per capita of Hershey, Pennsylvania, it beats that of the whole entire nation of Ivory Coast, hands down. That is, and yet Hershey, Pennsylvania, not farming cocoa, only involved in processing and manufacturing manufacturing, and converting cocoa beans into cocoa pastries and products. They are deciding what the terms, especially of purchase, will be in the world market. This is what I think, and these are the ideas that I think will become more viable when you start looking at a country like Ivory Coast. Let's look at the economy. Let's look at ways in which we can get young people back to work. Let's look at ways in which we can stop this mass migration of young people leaving the country. Just like I said, a 22.7 reduction in cocoa production in Ivory Coast is alarming. 22.7. That in itself is crazy. While we are supposed to be going up, we are going down. I understand that there are so many factors involved in this, but there has to be a way in which we have an outlook, a forecast on how to prevent some of these things from happening, because most of these things are quite preventable.
Thank you so much, Dr. FONGOD. Like you mentioned, is equally what in looking at the nation's economic outlook. Now, Dr. FONGOD, or better still, Dr. Eddie, straight to the point, when you look at the political figure like Charles Ble Goude, do you think he has what it takes to, run for the nation's presidency? And of course, if him running for the nation's presidency, say he's granted an amnesty, do you see him bringing about the change which he advocates for, to the changing, the political arena and others in the West African country?
It will be very, very, very wrong. I'm not grading students in here, to determine whether the student, has performed very well to pass an exam. It is, I will call it a work in progress, right? When it comes to politics, when it comes to a political, figure vying for a position. It can be the top job. It can be a position as a member of parliament. It can be a position as a mayor, as the head of a regional council, as we have in Cote d'Ivoire, or a member of the Senate, whichever it is in there. What does it take for a leader to do that? It takes, number one, a group of people behind you. For some of them, it is a political movement. Others, it is a political party. Charles Ble Goude has a political party, a movement that he has transformed into a political party, and he's mobilizing people around that. When you look at what he did in his hometown of around home area of Gagnoa or other places in Cote d'Ivoire where he goes, you have people. When he convenes, a congress of his political party, people are in there. He has representation here in the United States. So that political machine is being put in place more and more in there, and it is part of the tools that you can assess to move forward. Does he have a program, a vision for the country? Him and the members of his party and the political bureau are working on that, or have proposed something to, they are yet to do that, fully, but more and more we are hearing in here. Not long ago, he met with the president of the Independent Electoral Commission. I believe that, this is, these are the steps that a leader, right, have to follow to position themselves for appeal to the electors and the voters. It is not a job in the search of or an exam that you sit for and then you collect grades for answering questions, were right or wrong in here, or a perfect dissertation that you write to a panel. The panel here are the people of Cote d'Ivoire. Right, these are the members of the jury, and they will be the one deciding if again the elections are run in a perfect, fair, transparent manner. There are other things in there in terms of him as a political leader. Charles Ble Goude for a long time was reproached with not finishing, his, reading his courses at the university. Right? Not long ago, I heard that, he landed an MBA. Right? All of those things are part of growing, are part of learning. I've seen him not long ago, traveling, to France, meeting with some leaders in whatever context, I don't know, in there, meeting with international journalists here and there. I believe that, he may have even also featured in African media or things like that. This is part of the apparatus that the political leader needs to navigate and be part of. Don't forget that Charles Ble Goude was also the leader of the most important, student union, of which I was a member of myself during the time the Fédération des étudiants des élèves étudiants.
And he featured here on For You Media as well.
For instance, so with that one, you also have creating opportunity of connections with student union leaders from other countries. And this I know for a fact, right? So all of those things are part, again, of the tools that he's relying on to build. So does this stand a chance? Once all those things are being built, I believe that, a chance is somewhere there for him to either succeed or not succeed. But Dr. Stanley said something that I want to build on. As we put the interest of the nation first, the question becomes, when I run for election, let's say that, today Dr. Eddie decides that, he wants to run for presidential, for the president's position in Cote d'Ivoire. If I lose, does it mean that, it's a disaster? Or where do I put the indicator of success? If I do run, and the competition is fair, I determine it is fair, open, equitable enough, and the outcome is that the people decide to go another way, and I come out as what happened in Ghana to say, congratulations to whoever won, but as a child of Cote d'Ivoire, as an African, I am ready to help the new government in place, move the country forward. This is a victory. And I believe that, from where Cote d'Ivoire was, where most of the African countries are today, this is what should be the #1 criteria or indicator of success for anybody vying for power. Yes, it is true. It is heartbreaking when you lose an election. But what is the bigger picture? The worst picture will be to participate in an election where 100 people die because they wanted to get to the poll, and some people preventing them from doing that, and then it led to some in-election or post-election violence. We don't want that. So where do we put the indicators of success for the political leaders now for the 2025 elections coming up in Cote d'Ivoire? This is what matters the most for me. So if Charles Ble Goude, as a friend, and somebody that, I have talked to, also in the past, is able to rationalize the thing in that way. If the other leaders also, Jean-Louis Billon, even Simon Gbagbo, President Gbagbo himself and others are able to rationalize things in such a way, I believe that we will set ourselves on the path of reconciliation. By the way, that allows me to come back to the question that you asked Dr. Stanley earlier about whether Charles Ble Goude returning to Cote d'Ivoire will reignite conflicts. He's been back to the country almost 3 years. It's going to be 3 years now. Yes. And we have not heard of any sign of conflict being reigniting. It is true that some people are still hurting, some people are still hesitating. People with the political party in power today in Cote d'Ivoire are also saying whatever they want to say, but at the end of the day, let us look at the discourse, the debate, and what Charles Ble Goude and his political party, where they have positioned themselves. Caravans of reconciliation were held. He led that, and he said, Cote d'Ivoire will no longer go back to where it was. At least he is not putting himself in the position of avenging himself or seeking retaliation for whatever happened before. This language needs to be taken into consideration, match that up with the actions that we see on the ground today. But for all of those things to not happen, whether Charles Ble Goude, Sorogio, or others return to politics, I don't know, Dr. Stanley, help me with this, what it means to return to politics. You see, people like President Gbagbo himself, whether you want him to run or not, he's already doing politics. Why? He does not have to open his mouth. I can open my mouth referencing him. The debate today is not about him, but so many times we have referenced him, we have referenced Simon Gbagbo. So there are people who are political figures, whether you like it or not, whether they're dead or not, they still do politics. So this notion of don't do politics is just a pure rubbish. Let me use this very trashy language in here. So it does not matter. What matters for conflict to not reignite in Cote d'Ivoire is number one, a fairer justice system. Do not weaponize the justice system against your opponents. Number two, the true reconciliation process. Where do we stand today? And number three, it is the question of, if we say reconciliation and we said reparations, people have lost a lot over the last 15 years. Some people lost their houses, lost their businesses, lost family members, lost their dignity. Some people were incarcerated, where they were violated. All of those things need to be repaired. People lost their properties, things that, you know what, they work very hard to get. How do we repair all those things? Once we do that, some people lost their lands. In the western part of Cote d'Ivoire, you have a new population that come in there. People have lost their villages, lost their lands. When Dr. Stanley talks about agriculture, there is no agriculture without lands. But when you take that away from people, or you replace the population by another one, it becomes a problem. This is what the true reconciliation means. And once we put this infrastructure, you know, in place, this human thing, and we repair this, I believe that whoever returns to politics will not, you know, necessarily reignite, you know, any sort of conflict in there. And this is what I truly believe.
Okay, Dr. Eddie, indeed, that was a brilliant one. If you're just joining us, ladies and gentlemen, this is Talking Point over 4U Media Africa, where today we're discussing Ivory Coast, where a political figure in the Ivorian political arena, Ble Goude, has called on the incumbent President Alassane Ouattara to grant him amnesty so he can run for the upcoming elections built for 2025. We're discussing this with our guests this day, amidst which we have Dr. Eddie, Eric, and of course Dr. Stanley FONGOD. Now moving forward with you, Dr. FONGOD, you listen to your co-panelists. Now shifting away from Ivory Coast, now relating this to the African continent, your co-panelists started a lot of pertinent points. Now building up on that, how could society in this context, countries within the context of the African continent, how can they strike a balance between the demand for justice and the need for political stability within their respective nations?
I think that, excuse me, we need to come to a place where we fully understand that each and every one of us, as much as we try to hold on to power, irrespective of whatever it is that we're holding on to, we have to be able to make sure we fully understand that at some point in time, we have to leave the scene. I think almost every ancient text in antiquity, whether you're talking about the Christian text, you're talking about the Islamic text, the Jewish text, the Berbers, and everything in between, there is this whole entire notion that we actually came naked, and naked we return. And the idea in this text is that you have to basically start thinking more about doing some things in life as to what you leave behind when you go, rather than what you take with you, because you take nothing with you. So I also stand in support with what Doctor said earlier on, and the idea is we really have many areas in which we can participate in building any nation, and this has to be in the consciousness of every African. One of the things I say most a lot is the fact that to everyone on the political scene on the continent of Africa, we have to learn how to dance. This experience or this exercise that is as old as humanity itself, you know, where we practice it a lot on the African continents within the context of Africa, is that when we dance, we don't dance alone. Dance for us is a symbol of celebration, is also a symbol of mourning or transition. We dance during good times, and we also dance during bad times. But in all of our dance, the idea is we are connecting to something bigger than ourselves. When you do dance, you dance in a circle. And if you're big enough, if the crowd is big enough, you're dancing in a group, you have to dance in a circle. And the idea is this, that somebody has to lead the dance. And as someone leads the dance, then someone has to follow. Sooner or later, once the dance has ensued, maybe a minute later, we have gone maybe once or twice around the circle, you will no longer be able to identify who is the leader and who is following. And the reason is because the greater good, or the essence of the dance itself, basically diminishes titles, it diminishes preferences, it diminishes who is in charge and who is not. We are all leading, we are all dancing, we are all doing what we're supposed to do. And I think that we have to come into this consciousness that the collective is always going to be what Africa needs, rather than our own individual achievements, rather than our own individual status quo. We have to start thinking about this from a collective standpoint, knowing mindfully well that each and every one of us, we have to participate in this grand design that is the continent of Africa. And like a jigsaw puzzle, each piece, which is each and every one of us, finding our place to paint this beautiful mosaic, a beautiful picture, a beautiful painting. And every painting begins with a single stroke. I don't know precisely, what the what life holds for the continent, but one thing I do understand perfectly well is whatever it is we ambition to see on the continent of Africa will have to become what is it that we've imagined, and what is it that we are willing to endure, what is it that we're willing to paint. And if painting this beautiful picture on the African continent would entails for us to basically look beyond ourselves, forget about what we're getting, and think about the overall good of everyone on the continent of Africa, you would have done much for Africa than anybody else. And frankly speaking, it has nothing to do with you being in power. It has everything to you being engaged in helping the continent, shaping the continent to become what the continent is supposed to be. Either it be in agriculture, be it, in science and technology, be it in infrastructural development, whatever, maybe you're just a small to medium-sized enterprise, whatever it is that you find yourself to do, if you're able to do it, I think you'll be doing much good to the continent of Africa. And let's stop fighting. Being in power is not the most important thing on the continent of Africa. Being productive for the African and helping each and every one of us on the African continent, move away from poverty, have better hospitals, whatever you can be able to do, all right? Better educational systems, whatever you can set up. There are people doing this now in the private sector. Whatever you can be able to do, I think we have to take these baby steps, and whatever we do, let us put our best foot forward. To me, that is the way we change the narratives. That's the way we basically change the story. That is how we push for a better Africa, and every Pan-African will be able to say amen to that.
Indeed. And speaking of taking the African continent forward, let's now look at it from regional and international dimensions. Dr. Eddie, you listened to your co-panelists who had his own viewpoint, but from your standpoint, what can a nation like Ivory Coast, Cote d'Ivoire, learn from other African countries that have gone through this same part, like what's happening within the political arena in the West African nation?
Two examples we want to, plenty of them. Sometimes when we talk about examples, we don't want to quote what is only good. We can also look at what went wrong, right? Because that's where actually we learn most, and we learn more in times of challenges. When you look on the positive side of what happened in the neighboring country next door to Cote d'Ivoire on December 7 past, former President John Dramani Mahama returned to power. We have not heard of any major problem with this election. The candidate of the outgoing, party or regime, Dr. Baumia, called him to congratulate. And Ghana elected the first woman, vice president in its history. This is history being made. How can this be something that, is replicated in Cote d'Ivoire? There are plenty of possibilities to do that. These two countries produce cocoa. These two countries are partners when it comes to the cocoa production in the world. Dr. Stanley mentioned that, earlier. Not to say, about, how much of this cocoa production is actually benefiting the people themselves who are actually every single day dealing with the ants, with the serpents, with the bush here and there to produce these cocoa beans. So it is way possible. Another story to learn is what happened in Senegal. Yes, before the election took place in Senegal last February or March, or April, we saw what happened. Right? It was a period of tension. But once the judicial system, the Supreme Court in that country decided to go left, whereas the President Macky Sall at the time was going right, what happened? You have an election that took place. You have a new regime that came in there. Whatever they're going to do now is left for us to see, but at least the alternative or the change of regime took place. We can also learn from that. One of the other things we can also learn from in Cote d'Ivoire is what happened in Nigeria. Nigeria invested a lot of money in the election that took place in April in that country that saw the victory of President Bola Ahmed Tinubu. But the Independent National Electoral Commission, the head of which commission, was said commission, I met, in Washington, D.C. Prior to the election and asked him some questions about, all these mechanisms in there. A lot of investments, were made in on technology and relying on technology, for instance. But we saw the fiasco, which almost derailed the entire process in this for this election, which was deemed to be the most important and the templates for the rest of West Africa, reeling with this political coup or unconstitutional changes that we are seeing, but also with some political leaders clinging to power by manipulating the constitution that they have. You have the case of Benin that is sitting there. So these are 4 cases that I mentioned, Sharon. What does Cote d'Ivoire have to learn? In each of those countries, leaders stuck to the constitution. They run for the 2 terms. If it was successful, they got out. President John Mahama ran for 1 term. He lost the election. He stepped aside. Nana Akufo-Addo ran the country for 2 terms. Now John Mahama won again, and he is back to power. These are examples that exist not just in West Africa, but in many other African countries as well. Although we have a clear research of a democratic order in Africa, I still believe, and I always say it on your show and your program, Sharon, that I am an Afro-optimistic person. In the midst of all the challenges that Africa is facing and what we are dealing with, I still believe that there are some good people, some good leaders in Africa or in the African countries that can turn things around. And these are some of the lessons, actually, from these 2 countries, these 4 countries that I mentioned that Cote d'Ivoire can learn from. Another thing we can learn from is what happened in the United States. I'm glad when I read, we're coming from some political leaders and analysts saying lessons that, Ivory Coast or Africa can learn from the United States, recent elections. But there are plenty of lessons that we can learn from Ghana too. There are plenty of lessons we can learn from what happened in Senegal. We should not be always contemplating or admiring what happened in the West. We have the resources in Africa to be able to do that. When it comes to the justice system, this is another thing that we need to actually learn from other countries. When it comes to reconciliation, what happened in South Africa, even though today you have, you still have a remnants of apartheid, there are some examples of countries where Truth and Reconciliation Commission truly delivered what they were expected to deliver, and Ivory Coast needs to learn from that. When you put together a Truth and Reconciliation Commission that work and make some recommendation, take the recommendation to the people, implement the recommendation, see what works, see what does not work, and change and move forward. But don't just put it in the drawers in your office and then do not implement. If we have a fair justice, a culture of accountability in our countries, a culture whereby impunity is completely prescribed. When people do things wrong, we convict them the right way in a fairer, with a fair proceedings, and we condemn them or we pardon them. If we continue to reel on that one, whoever comes to power will determine the ways in which justice should go, or what is justice in their own terms, then it will be problematic, and we will continue to hear these sounds of a retaliation. I don't think that's where we want to go. Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger are today under military rules. It's not for nothing. There are plenty of reasons that may justify that. But Ivory Coast itself should also learn from its own past. What led to the military regime to surge into power in 1999? Do we want to go back in there? The answer to that question is no. So we start learning from where we got the rain to beat us. We look at other countries around us, neighboring countries. Even Liberia, I forgot to mention. There was also a very peaceful transition of a power there in that country a year ago that saw George Weah leaving power and then President Bouaka coming into power. These are marvelous examples that we can very easily emulate.
Thank you immensely, Dr. Eric Eddy, expert for today. Now, in the same line as the Afrocentric optimism, which you so brilliantly put forth earlier on, I would like to culminate this conversation this day with you, Dr. FONGOD. And now, picking up from where your co-panelists stopped, with all the lessons, like your co-panelist was stating, Dr. Eddy had mentioned earlier, looking at all this, all these examples that we have enumerated on the African continent, what should be the way forward for the West African country as well as the continent of Africa?
Well, I think that the best of us and the best that Africa has to offer is right within us. And I understand with Dr. Eddy, we don't have to look outside of the continent of Africa for us to be able, to have any kind of meaning. I think that we can be able to look within the continent of Africa for meaning. And so the idea that constantly we are trying to be able to extrapolate, how great we are by looking at some Western or Eastern bloc, by looking at the Western bloc or the Eastern bloc, for some kind of a point of reference for greatness, that in itself is not right. So I think that what we see happening on the continent of Africa, in my opinion, is thanks to the Pan-African agenda. I think that social media, I think that the ability for us to communicate Pan-Africanism more effectively in the 21st century, using these platforms and this network is absolutely brilliant, it's beautiful. And I also believe that we are raising a generation of young people who are seeing what is happening and who are believing that they do have what it takes to be able to help, shape the future and build the future of the continent, the kind of Africa that they want. If that was going to be the case, I think that we should also be able to expect some similar success that we have seen in Ivory Coast, we have seen in Liberia. We should be able to see those successes taking place in Ghana, taking place in Ivory Coast. And I think that for me, I'm quite optimistic. I think that the future for the continent of Africa is absolutely bright. I think it's beautiful. And I think that we have to do whatever it takes so far as Africa is concerned to be able to make sure that we push for the kind of Africa, that we truly want, the kind of Africa where our own children will be able to say this is the utopia that they dream of whenever they try to immigrate. Either they're going to the Middle East, which has become the destination of choice for most Africans, or they're trying to be able to find their ways to Europe or the Americas. I think we have to do whatever it takes to make sure that young people see value in Africa and see value back home. And this value will come when leaders begins to do what they need to do to make sure that all that they see happening outside of the continent of Africa begins to happen within the continent of Africa. And I think that that's the great responsibility that we can. So one election is going to help us. And I think that we will do whatever it takes to be able to make sure that the multiple elections we have on the continent of Africa, whether we're looking at these elections from the standpoint of pushing an agenda for success throughout the whole entire continent, whether that agenda is in the areas of agriculture, infrastructure development, whatever transformative power these elections can bring so far as Africa is concerned, I think that will be welcome news. So far as I'm concerned, I'm quite optimistic about the future, and I think that the future looks bright. I think that we are doing the right things, and hopefully, we can be able to shame people into believing and into knowing that Africa is far more important than any political party, that no political party is bigger than their country, that we have to look at country first and political party second. Country first, Africa first.
Africa first, indeed, and we stay in line with just what you said, Dr. FONGOD, that we do have the responsibility to create the Africa that we want, and of course play a key role and vital role in the transformation of the African continent. Thank you immensely, Dr. FONGOD, for your collaboration, as well as you, Dr. Eddie, for participating in today's edition of the program.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Meanwhile, on that note, I'll say, ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of today's edition of Talking Point over 4U Media Africa, your Pan-African channel. Today, we discussed Ivory Coast with the latest developments in the political arena of the West African nation, where, of course, a political figure, Charles Ble Goude, has called for amnesty to be able to run for the presidential elections built for 2025. We believe you learned a lot from today's conversation. Ladies and gentlemen, while we put a stop to today's program, we'll say to stay in company of our numerous programs.
All right, Dr. Eddie.